member at UNC, at the Eshelman School of Pharmacy. I've been here, gosh, a long time, about 25 years. I went to undergrad at UNC, so I'm a Tar Heel born, Tar Heel bred. I was born in Eastern North Carolina. When I began on faculty here at UNC, I started out in HIV pharmacology. So I had a research in HIV pharmacology, mostly globally in sub-Saharan Africa. I had a practice in the HIV clinic and infectious diseases group. And then around 09, 08, somewhere in there, it's a little blurry. I've shifted my focus, research focused teaching to integrative health and practice as well. And then took a bit of a moment. I really would like to keep my job at UNC at the School of Pharmacy. I enjoy it. I enjoy teaching students. How can I focus in on integrative health and still be able to provide what's needed within the school, but also integrative health and whole health modality in general. So that's when I began to really focus in more on dietary supplements. So I kind of make jokes when people say, hey, can you talk about dietary supplements? I'm like, sure. That's sort of like saying, can you talk about drugs? So I will say that each and every time I have a talk about dietary supplements specifically, there inevitably will be questions that I will not know specific answers to. And you'll see in a moment how many products are on the market, and that's the reason for that. However, I'm happy to get back with many of you, and we'll talk through about how you can also do that, answer some of those questions for yourself. So just some brief objectives we're going to define so we're all on the same page what dietary supplements are, how plants are different from pharmaceuticals, and how they're similar. I think we intuitively know that, but just to provide perspective on that as it relates to taking pharmaceuticals versus supplements or even together. What are some key factors for safe use? If nothing else today, I really want you all to have some take-home messages and resources around how to use supplements safely. Above and beyond any data around effectiveness or efficacy for supplements, it's my priority and many of us that are in this field to ensure that products are safe and that you're using them safely. And then I will at the end talk a bit about some specific supplements and data around those supplements in menopause transition and specifically menopause symptoms. I'm certain I will not be able to speak on every supplement that you may have questions about just for time's sake, but you can certainly ask questions about other products and I will do my best to try and answer those. And then what I'm going to do the most in this next hour or so is provide you all hopefully with some resources that you may be familiar with, but some of you may not, that you can use to answer some of these questions for yourselves. So I must start off by saying I'm not an expert in women's health dietary supplements by any means. I've been, as I was saying, focusing, doing research, teaching, and clinical practice on dietary supplements for quite a while now. But we all have mentors, we all have experts in the field. These are just a few of them. So I know many of these individuals, sometimes depending on who you are, may have a strong reaction to their personalities or who they are. And that's perfectly okay. We all do. But I will say these three individuals, Tori Hudson being one, who was part of my fellowship training in integrative health, has some great resources, evidence-based resources around integrative health in general for women's health. So a great resource. Tarani Low Dog, who this is her, if you all don't know her, and myself, I was a little bit younger then, quite a few years ago when I first was at her ranch, but she's a physician by training, family medicine physician, but originally was a midwife, herbalist, and that's sort of her roots as well. And then Mary Claire Haver, I'm sure many of you have heard about her, perhaps all of you have. She's very popular on social media with celebrities. So definitely three very different people with very different messages and ways they approach dietary supplements and integrative women's health. And those are just some folks that I have learned from, not necessarily where data has come from that I'm going to talk about in this talk, but I did want to provide some additional resources for you all that you can Google and find their information online. Okay, so as I was preparing for this talk with you all today, lots of PubMed searching and just gathering more data. This title of a paper came up, and I was like, wow, that's so true. So, U.S. women desire greater professional guidance on hormone and alternative therapies for menopause symptom management. I'm like, yeah, we really do, right? Who wants to guess when this was published? Any ideas? Because I was shocked, a little bit shocked. Maybe many of you aren't, but I was. 2021, 2020. That's kind of what I was thinking, even 20, yeah, 2022, somewhere in there. 2006. So yeah, wow. And maybe, and my hunch is probably this messaging was long before that. But the point being, this has been known and been said for such a long time. I know I'm speaking to folks that feel this and know this every day. But just to kind of point out, we know this has been, we as a whole, healthcare professionals, consumers, patients alike, know that we all have desires to have more guidance. Okay, so as promised, we'll make sure we set the stage for dietary supplements. Again, seems kind of simple, but want to make sure we know what our topic is for today. And this is per FDA law and FDA definitions. Now, granted, the FDA defined supplements a long time ago, 1994. So the definition is not outdated, but know that the
Your prescription is
legislation.
ready. To update your preferences so you can hear medication details.
Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry about that. So this definition is still current. It's a bit, the legislation is definitely, we would all say in the world of dietary supplements, needs some attention and hopefully updated in some way. But we're speaking about vitamins, so the fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, vitamin C, all the B vitamins, and then a large number of minerals, so magnesium, calcium, which we'll talk about calcium a little bit today, and then this huge category of non-vitamin, non-minerals, right? And that category can be broken down into plant-based products, so things like echinacea, some of the products we'll talk about today, some of the phytoestrogen products are from plants, amino acids. And then there's this larger sort of other category. So it's not a vitamin, they're not vitamins, they're not minerals, they're not from plants. Well, lycopene could be from a plant, but it may not be. So glucosamine, fish oil is a great example. One of the most commonly utilized supplements in the US being fish oil. We know fish oil specifically doesn't come from plants. However, we know that other omega-3 fatty acids can come from plants. And then protein powders as well. General guidance. So I like to start with just sort of some overall bulleted points of things to know and to have take-home messages to perhaps remember as you're going through this world of dietary supplement use. So number one, I think this is not emphasized enough, and I know myself and our research group is really trying to encourage better documentation and conversation around supplement use. But whatever you can do to ensure that you inform your health care providers of your current use of dietary supplements, first and foremost, but also if there's a desire to use dietary supplements. We know that there's data in the literature to show that lots of folks aren't comfortable doing that for a variety of reasons. And I totally understand it myself as a patient. So I'm not only speaking here as a pharmacist and academician and healthcare professional, but also as a patient in this situation. So can absolutely relate to not having that two-way communication or feeling accepted around starting a conversation. But I do encourage you to do that. And then also personally and also to the providers to know or reflect upon your goals for taking the supplements. I think a lot of folks, including myself, I've been guilty of this too, is, you'll read about supplements or you have conversations with your family members or friends. You'll see things on the internet, social media, and it seems as though that dietary supplement, is really, it speaks to you as something you want to do. And you may not always know exactly what that supplement is actually doing. And sometimes the way that they're marketed, it's not very clear, right? And some of that is based on law. Some of that it's not allowed to be as clear as prescription meds are. So again, just thinking, what are your goals behind taking supplements? Very, very cautious when combining supplements and prescription medications, and we'll talk a bit more about this when we talk about specific herbs, and then how ways you can think about combining those safely. I will say that I tend to be very conservative around combining prescription meds with supplements. I think I'd mentioned I was practicing in the HIV clinic for a long time, so there was a lot of risk for detrimental effects on antiretroviral concentrations and exposures and effectiveness when individuals might be using other prescription meds and or other supplements with their antiretrovirals. And unfortunately, in that situation, we did see some combinations that were detrimental and had effects on their viral load and ultimately their health. So these can be very real. There can also be very safe ways to combine. And I will say this is an area of supplement science that we don't know a lot about. We know a lot about a few things, but there's a lot we don't know about most products. Use products that have been, tested in a lab. I'm going to provide some resources because that's always a big question. How do I know which products to take, which ones are safe? So I'll provide you some guidance and resources on those. There are I just looked a moment ago, just in one database that we know doesn't have 100% of all products on the market. There are in that database over 211,000 specific products. I mean, how in the world can anyone navigate that marketplace and know what's the best products to take? And within that, interestingly, there's about 1,500 ingredients that we've been able to try and comprehensively identify. So a lot of combination products, a lot of different products that have the same ingredients in them. So I guess a good way is there's a lot of opportunity for choices, but navigating those choices can be challenging. And they're not all good quality products. I'll show you some examples of that. Less is more. That tends to be my personal approach. I'm not suggesting that combination products or combination supplements are not helpful. But in general, I would advise individuals to just stick to products that have one ingredient in them versus multiple ingredients. Either way, if you have a positive effect with the supplement, at least you can, or a negative effect, a side effect with the supplement, you can better identify what might be happening if there's one ingredient or a few ingredients versus a large number of ingredients. I don't recommend using essential oils orally. That seems a little separate from this because dietary supplements are oral products, but I have difficulty not pointing out a little bit of information about essential oils when I have opportunity to talk with other individuals, because this is something that is commonly misunderstood. And it doesn't mean that there aren't a few opportunities where essential oils could be ingested. Those are very few situations, and they should absolutely be done under advisement or under guidance of an aromatherapy expert. They can cause some pretty severe organ damage otherwise. And then ask for assistance. I do love plants. I eat plants. I like to grow plants. I like to think about supplements. but also feel very strongly about using them safely and especially in combination with other medications. Just some additional information. I'm not going to go through all of this, but one to provide a little bit more guidance on essential oils. In addition to not using them orally, how can we use them safely topically? And there is a fair amount of data with using essential oils in various different ways, usually either topically and diluted in a safe way or inhaled in some safe way. So those of you that are pharmacists or have lots of experience in herbal medicine will know that our first medicines were plants, right? So, 58,000 years ago, there weren't pharmaceutical agents. Even 100 years ago, there weren't pharmaceutical agents. Um, sorry, 300 years ago, there weren't pharmaceutical agents either. So folks were really smart. Like through history, we know that indigenous practices, whether in Eastern medicine, even in our own country with indigenous people medicine, that is how people survived and learned around plant medicine. Most recently, I just thought this was an interesting fact that in 2024, and I believe I have a link here to this story. It's quite interesting. In an archaeological dig, there was evidence of ephedra, which we know to be is a plant, evidence of ephedra berries buried within a tomb of inside of a cave of a human. And there's more information, more stories if you go to that link and look at that. But just thought that was even more specific and very clear, detailed preservation of medicinal use in the past. And 80% of all medicines prior to 1850 were plants. And then, long story, you can read a lot about the history of plant-based medicine, but after World War II, and a lot of this was stimulated from the discovery of penicillin in the early 1900s or 1920s. That really stimulated the approach to utilization of pharmaceuticals and synthetic medicines. Structure of plants versus drugs, they are not the same. I think we all realize that, but I just wanted to point out how they're very similar in many ways, but they're also very different in many ways. So estradiol, I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with estradiol being one of the estrogens that is available both endogenously, so within our bodies, as well as provided as a pharmaceutical agent. You can see the very clear defined structure here, which is again the same structure that you have within your body as well. And then compared to that, just one example of what we would call a phytoestrogen, which I'll talk a little bit more about that topic in a moment. Soy being one food-based mechanism for that we think about for phytoestrogens is complex, right? And this is just a few of the structures within the soy plant that we know has activity towards estrogen receptors and being phytoestrogens. Isoflavones are this class of phytoestrogens within the soy plant, as well as in other plants. But there's also, I wanted to point out, there's a reason why all of these components, plus many others, are part of plants. So plants, have their own mechanisms to flourish, to provide to the ecosystem, but also protective mechanisms for themselves so they can continue to grow and produce, right? So it's complex. Not that estradiol is not complex, because wow, it is really complex. But even looking at plant-based approaches to a similar sort of target can be even more complex than a pharmaceutical agent. And just to provide another example of this, I know I talk about cannabis a lot and to audiences, and we know that these are complex again because perfect example. These are just some of the components of the cannabis plant. that you can see, look on this picture on the right. And you can see this again as a pretty um, simple explanation of different components of cannabis, but you can see that even these individual components have different sort of actions. And that also helps to understand as we take plants and we isolate plants and harvest them in certain ways or develop dietary supplements from them in certain ways, we can have different levels of different components of the plant within one dietary supplement, right? So again, lots of ways to think about, is the product that I'm taking off the shelf or purchasing what I think it is? And is my goal in that bottle, or is my goal something in a different product or a different approach that I might want to think about? Okay, so shifting a bit now into resources for supplements. I'm not going to go through each of these, but hopefully you all can see the links. They're hyperlinked too, but I'm not sure on the website if you're able to hyperlink, but these should be correct URLs for each of those. Great resources. These first three are absolutely free resources for anyone to access. The National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health has some fantastic free resources. Um, I will say their recommendations for specific supplements or integrative health modalities are fairly conservative. And what I mean by that is they're fairly cautious unless there are pretty extensive randomized controlled trials, understandably. They may not recommend a product or a practice for a specific condition. Um, and just to take that with a grain of salt. There are some other approaches that we might use supplements that may not have a 2,000 person randomized control trial like many of our pharmaceutical agents do. But just knowing that's a different approach to the research. Office of Dietary Supplements specifically out of the NIH is going to have some more detailed information. I think I have this link on another slide, so I'll talk about that one a little bit more in a moment. Memorial Sloan Kettering did start out with supplements on their site that were sort of directed at supportive of cancer care. But I have seen a this is a huge growing database that has many, many more supplements and really good data that's also free to anyone. American Botanical Council and American Herbal Product Association are also links that much of which is free to public, but you can also purchase additional subscriptions to give you more detailed information. These last three, if you're part of an academic medical center, most of them, sorry, the second two, most of them are going to be available at many academic medical centers and free access. Otherwise, if you practice or have interest in, or really just want to dig into deep on dietary supplements, natural medicine or NatMed is a very well referenced database. It's not perfect by any means. But it is a very large comprehensive database and one that I will use when I need to think about clinical care. And then Examine is a newer database. Examine Plus is another type of subscription within that product that does have a growing database of products as well. I use it sometimes, but I do refer patients and consumers to it fairly often. I think I might have seen. If there's a pertinent question, y'all can feel free to just yell it out. I'm happy to answer that if it makes more sense at the time. Thanks. Okay. How do you choose quality dietary supplement products? Great question. I will say it is not very easy, but there are ways that you can, that you as a consumer and patient, as well as other healthcare providers, many folks that I work with, even within these walls in the School of Pharmacy, come to me and ask me for advice on a lot of these things. So this is not something that is necessarily taught extensively in professional healthcare schools. So just know any of us can likely always use some additional guidance. US Pharmacopoeia does have a dietary supplement verification program. That's the link that's available. This program, as well as this NSF or NSF sport program, is not a requirement by dietary supplement manufacturers to have verified products. It's voluntary and it's quite expensive. USP can be upwards of tens of thousands of dollars that the manufacturer will pay to USP to evaluate their product and provide their USP seal. Some of you may have seen those seals on your products, and you'll see some in a moment. So it's not a very large list, but it's growing, so that's good. NSF and NSF Sports, just a different organization that also verifies or certifies products. That is a larger list, quite a larger list than USP. So I do think these are good places to start. You may not always find what you're looking for in these two links, but I do think they're great. It's a great resource. I will say those that are in athletic organizations, for example, do really rely on NSF sports specifically to um, to recognize individuals that want to take products that are in sports fields, that those are sometimes the only products that are allowed in certain sports organizations. I can talk about that some other time. We do some collaboration with them through the Department of Defense. So I can elaborate on that if needed. Third-party testing or in-house manufacturing testing is the majority of those 200 plus thousand products. Sometimes that is not very easy to find, but what I would just advise folks, if you're on a website or you're looking at a product, you want to ensure that that product has been tested in a lab, ideally a separate lab from the manufacturer. But there are some companies like Gaia Herbs. Some of you may know Gaia Herbs. They are local to North Carolina, the mountains of North Carolina, and they actually do most of their in-house their product testing in-house. But they're very transparent about it. You can take your product, go to their website with this specific link, enter in the batch code, and find what we call a certificate of analysis, which is basically saying this is what's in the product, and we've been able to identify it, and it has safe levels, if any, of heavy metals within the product.
So, a question in the chat, are these tests to prove that supplements are safe, or are there ones that actually show like clinical efficacy? I'm also wondering if they're just testing for the like to make sure there's no like lead, as you said, or if they're testing for to ensure that like what is in the product is actually in the product, because I know that sometimes is a concern as well.
That's a great question. I can answer with both of these slides, and thank you. That was not very clear when I said this. So these resources, and make sure I'm not telling lies. These resources on this slide are going to be more about what data is available and some adverse effects that you might see from dietary supplement ingredients. So, for example, if you're interested in black cohosh, which we'll talk about in a moment, these websites will have information about black cohosh specifically. None of these, someone can correct me, but I don't know of any mechanisms within these resources that provide testing on products specifically. This list does provide testing directly on dietary supplement products. And that testing includes is what is on the label of the supplement, exactly what's in the bottle within some ranges. And does it contain safe levels of heavy metals, lead, cadmium, mercury, etc.? Or does it have any in there at all? And you may ask yourself, why would it have any? So if you think about plants, where plants are grown, they're in the soil, it's likely that there's going to be some sort of heavy metals that are part of the plant as it's grown and as it's processed. In addition, I will add that NSF Sports specifically, I don't know all the products, but they do tend to do a panel test on products that are on pharmaceuticals that tend to be inappropriately added to dietary supplements. So, for example, if athletes have supplements, DHEA is one that I'll introduce you all in a little bit. They may test dietary supplements specifically for products that they know are not allowed for athletes to take. So that's just an additional step that specific group tests for. But most all of these, and I do have one additional, on the next slide, I'll have one additional resource that looks at product testing.
So quick follow-up question, and maybe you're going to get to this. There was, I don't know, maybe 3 to 6 months ago, a lot of press around plant-based protein powders and the high amounts of lead in them. And, you know, like you said, it makes sense that there's lead in them because they're derived from plants. How do you know what is a safe amount of lead and what's not a safe amount of lead? Is that a standard metric or is that sort of personal judgment?
No, so yes, there's absolutely guidance from, I want to say it depends on the product. USDA, FDA. There may be an additional organ, definitely those two. That I know I'm forgetting something big. It'll come to me. Where and any of us could argue that these numbers change, and we could get into a big conversation about this, but I won't. So there are recognized levels that that level and below is allowed to be in a product. We'll just say lead as an example. So if there's a cutoff for lead, anything below that is deemed to be allowable by federal regulation, allowable within that product. Now, you as an individual may say, I want 0 lead in my product, right? And that's where you would need to, in Gaia's case, this will be a good example. If you go to this link and look up one of their laboratory reports, it will very clearly tell you how much of the plant is in that product, but it will also give you specific information around how much lead and other heavy metals are within the product. I know that's a really short answer to that. I can elaborate later if y'all have other questions, but that's where it's also when you start thinking about changing these acceptable levels of heavy metals in products and water, I could keep going, affects all of us, right? Every one of us. So the protein thing is, honestly, I hear that periodically. It can be lead, it can be mercury, cadmium. There's some reasons I can talk about behind why that happens, but that's where really purchasing these products, including protein powders that we know have been tested for those things before you purchase them, is going to be the best thing that you could do. Another resource that's not free, so I didn't want to put it in that former slide, but one that I use all the time is consumerlab.com. I believe it's around $50 a year, maybe $100 a year. It's an independent group that takes products from the marketplace, tests them within their lab, and does a nice report on them. And they provide information similar to what I just described that those other groups do for specific dietary supplements. In addition, they have some great references and evidence-based summaries on dietary supplement ingredients. It's not, it's not the 1,400 ingredients that we know exist, but it is a very large number. So folks that have interest in supplements, it is a good investment. Dietary supplement label database I mentioned previously when talking about the Office of Dietary Supplements. This is a free resource. Would encourage you all to go in there and look around and see what's in there. But this is, at least what we have in our country, the most comprehensive database of products on the market. So if you're looking for a vitamin D3 product that has 1,000 units per dose in it, as an example, this could be a place where you can enter that information into the database and it'll give you some results. It'll show you labels specifically as well as if those have been tested, third-party tested, at least from those certified programs or not. So again, I would just encourage you to sort of go in there and see what you can find. I will say, yes, these things are very helpful. I probably use Consumer Lab the most, but what I use even more commonly are these. It's just from learning all of this information over the past decade or plus. So there are reputable distributors of dietary supplements, just like we know for pharmaceutical agents. They don't come not typically directly from the manufacturer to the pharmacy. There's a distributor in between. So same for dietary supplements. These are just two of them. I know these distributors fairly well. They're very stringent about what products they will even distribute from manufacturer directly to patients and directly to providers. So that's also it's a free resource, so you can look up the catalog. It's also an opportunity for anyone on here that's a healthcare professional that sees patients. It provides you a mechanism as well to make recommendations for specific products to patients. And then just over the years, I have learned a lot about various companies, their product quality. None of these people pay me, but these are just some of the companies that I tend to be my go-to recommendations. Just a bit of a caution about where to purchase products. So I know it's very easy to click and Google and find things online, and I'm not suggesting don't completely do that, but just know where you're buying things from. Directly from manufacturers are going to be the best option. So if you go to Gaia Herbs, buying directly from Gaia Herbs, you can feel confident that it's coming directly from that company. Again, those two reputable distributors that I mentioned. Retail, so in person, Whole Foods tends to have quite a variety of dietary supplements. They are sometimes a little more expensive than you might find in the distributors, but I would not say it's excessively more expensive. Amazon, absolutely use caution. Couple of years ago, I would say absolutely not. Do not purchase products off of Amazon. I've opened up my comments about that a little bit. I've been a little more open about that recommendation, but what I will say for sure is you want to see where is it coming from. So you want to ensure that Amazon is that distributor directly from the manufacturer is ideal. So Nordic Naturals is one of the companies that I know a lot about. And so this product would be coming ideally directly from Nordic Naturals. Now, Amazon does have cautions in place, or they have rules in place that products must be third-party tested or tested that they will distribute. However, I have some colleagues who've done some research when that rule was first implemented that didn't quite find that was happening. So I'm hopeful that has changed a bit, but again, just to be very cautious. For time's sake, I'm going to click through here. You all can read some of these separate manufactured products that are of good quality. We're going to use this scorecard and I'm just looking at my time here. I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions. I'm going to use this scorecard in just a moment, but I'll introduce it here. This is a scorecard to help you evaluate, and this is a high level evaluation, right? So just a first place to start for evaluating safe dietary supplement products. This was developed by some colleagues at the Department of Defense. They have a program called Operation Supplement Safety, and they have been funded and mandated by the federal government to develop resources for both providers and patients, in that case, military servicemen, to use products safely. So you'll see there's a series of questions. If you have a product of interest, this is one tool that you could use to evaluate that product. And there's a link to that scorecard. just some examples of labels. I know we've all looked at these, but maybe not. I know, we don't always, we might look at the front of the bottle, but let's maybe try to encourage us all to look at the back of the bottle to see what's in there. So I'm guessing many of us do that with our food. So I would just encourage you to also do that with dietary supplements. Um, and I'm not going to go through all the detail here, but just looking at, just holistically how products can just have different types of labels. So this one should be fairly clear. It's a nature made multi. So as it's suggested, it's multiple vitamins and minerals. You do want to make sure that a percent daily value is listed here. If there is a percent daily value identified. For example, turmeric does not have a percent daily value. It's a plant-based ingredient, so it's not going to have that listed. But it should be very clear what the dose is that you plan to take for this product. And on the next slide, you will see that that is not clear in some products, but very important that even if you may not know what 32 milligrams of turmeric is or 30 milligrams of curcuminoids are exactly, it should be transparent on the label, similar to this Nordic Natural omega-3 fatty acid product as well. These are some that are not very transparent and a little bit frightening. And to be truthful, I sort of lived in the happy world of all the Gaia, Nordic Natural, Nature Made, Nature Way dietary supplements for a very long time, until some of my DoD and MLB colleagues said, wait a minute, these other things are out there. And I think I knew it, we've all seen them. But just to know that these products are out there, they're on the market, they are available for purchase. I would look out for things like outlandish promises that are on fronts of label, extreme euphoria, intense focus. Proprietary blends that you really might have difficulty even pronouncing, and that's part of what the scorecard does. And then tianeptine, some of you may have heard of. We often nickname it the gas station heroin. It's actually not allowed to be distributed within North Carolina. The interesting part of this, and some of these products is even smaller, for research purposes only. Wow. So that statement on this bottle does allow this product to be legally on a shelf, but it hopefully gives us pause to say, should I be taking something that is for research purposes only and not intended for human use? Okay, let me check my time again. Okay. I did want to walk through just briefly using this Nature Made Multi as an example and the scorecard. I think it's self-explanatory, but I'll just walk through this briefly with you all. So is this product third-party certified? And it may be a little difficult to see here, but USP is on the label of this product. So yes, it is. And in this scorecard specifically, this is where my DoD colleagues and I have to have a little compromise. So they are really pushing for third-party certification across the board. Understandably, it's transparent. You can read it, you can look it up and find it. So in this scorecard, it specifically does mean one of these four third-party certifications. I would add into that companies like Gaia Herbs who are transparent and do test their products. I would give that a yes here as well. Are there less than 6 ingredients? Well, no, this is a multivitamin. So by definition, it's going to have a lot of ingredients. Doesn't mean you shouldn't take it. It just gives you some pause, perhaps. Is the label free of worst proprietary blend matrix complex? It is in this case. Can you easily pronounce? Some of you may say no, but most of these should be fairly easily pronounceable. And then caffeine is a big, this was developed for the military, so they really do focus a bit around caffeine. And we know that products that are marketed to servicemen can often have high levels of caffeine. So that was also included. So the amount of caffeine, if there is any, does not exceed 200 milligrams. So that's a yes. Let's have questionable, is it free of questionable claims? Yes. This is tricky. So they're less than 200% daily value if exists, and we know that many multivitamins will often have high levels of certain vitamins. B12 tends to be one of those. So that one does happen to be higher than 2%, but in this case, we have it at 5, yay. So anything 4 or more is perhaps one tool that you can use to say, yes, this might be a reasonable product to take. Okay, shifting a bit about, just looking ahead here. Okay, I'm going to go through, you all can read this data, but just know, I think it's important to know that there are a large percentage of people that do take prescription medications in combination with dietary supplements. And again, sometimes that can be safe, but sometimes it cannot. And sometimes we just don't know. And we know that happens. We want to support people as healthcare professionals to ensure that we're safe. And that oftentimes will lead to lack of education, not knowing what those combinations, if they're safe or not. Sometimes it's better to say no. And I've had to say no because I don't know, and I do this all the time. But that's where it provides an opportunity for you in conversation with your healthcare professional to have those goals identified, right? If you have the goal of I'm taking black cohosh because I'm having 15 night sweats a night, okay, let's have that conversation. And if that does not seem to be acceptable with your prescription medications, let's find some alternative ways to meet your goals. I'm gonna just briefly talk about this, but you all can maybe trust me with the math or do the math later. Just knowing that taking more than one product, and this happens a lot with vitamins and minerals, that if you're taking 2 different products for different reasons, to really look at the labels and make sure you're not taking excessive amounts of any one ingredient. Vitamin D tends to be one of those B vitamins that as well, that if you're taking multiple products may have a large amount in them. So these 3 products combined have 5,000 units of D3 in them in combination, which for some people may be needed. For the general person is a fairly high amount of vitamin D. So again, wanting to make sure you're reading and looking at all the labels. This also goes back to that conversation around, and now we're transitioning more into specific ingredients and products for menopause transition. This being an example. But this is also illustrating an example of different products that may have singular ingredients, such as this maca specific product, versus other products that might contain a similar active ingredient, but also lots of other things. I am not saying one of these is better than the other, but my recommendation is to start with more simple, focused ingredients and see how you may respond in that case. Versus if, for example, you took this specific product, some of you may be familiar with this label. If you took this specific product, had a side effect, you're not going to necessarily know exactly what it was related to, and or if it's beneficial, what component of this is actually being helpful. So again, not right or wrong, just a perspective and a good way to look at this. And I will say, sometimes if it's an extreme adverse effect, liver toxicity tends to be one of those, which we'll talk about in a minute, is also misunderstood sometimes with supplements. But let's say that did happen with a product that had lots of ingredients in it. It's going to be very challenging to try to directly identify what ingredient within that product caused that extreme side effect in that sense. I'm just looking in here for a second. Yeah, Mary Claire. I will. Actually, I have one of her products, Jennifer, coming up. Okay, so we're going to talk this is a huge high level overview of some specific products for menopause related conditions. I know there was a lot up front around product selection, but I feel like those resources, no matter what your desires or your goals are really critical to sort of set the stage to have those, sort of high level thoughts around supplements. But I did want to provide again some information specifically around menopause related conditions in this case. There we go. Okay. So bone health we know is important for everyone, but especially has a concentration and focused in menopause transition and postmenopause. So ideally a balanced diet. I know we all hear that quite often, sometimes easier said than done, but a balanced diet with adequate calcium and vitamin D is what's desired and what's the best approach for bone health. Weight-bearing exercise, not smoking, minimizing alcohol intake. All things are great and the things that we really want to make sure we try and optimize for bone health, especially menopause. Calcium and vitamin D, I think we all know are very important for skeletal health. Now we know that intake, even in adolescence, is really where it all starts. So not waiting until menopause, helping our family and friends here. In adolescence is when we really need to stress that bone building approach, but we're here where we are now. So getting bone mineral density testing depends on your age and other risk factors as to when that might happen for you as an individual. But for sure, supporting your bone density with calcium and vitamin D. So when I'm talking about calcium recommendations here, this is calcium recommendations without a diagnosis of osteopenia or osteoporosis. Now, it may still be pertinent in those diagnoses, but this is the general postmenopausal or menopausal transition female. We know that calcium supports the skeletal health with a goal of reducing bone loss. So not to build bone, but to reduce further bone loss. There's also, you can have too much calcium. So taking too much or too much absorbed calcium as well, which there's mechanisms for that, can have some side effects, can cause kidney stones in some cases. And we know not many years ago, forget when the year was now, but there was some also heightened alert around cardiovascular risk with excessive systemic concentrations of calcium. So what's recommended 1,200 milligrams a day if you're greater than 50, and that's with food and supplement combined. So if you're able to get that amount within your food, that's fantastic. That's ideal. I would say most of us, that's not possible, or it's challenging rather. So ensuring that that combination reaches around 1,200 milligrams a day. If you're taking a supplement, ideally no more than 500 milligrams in a dose, and that's just based on how much calcium can get absorbed at one time. There are actually more than I even realized calcium salt forms on the market. Calcium citrate, especially if you have lower acid in the stomach, older individuals tend to have a decreased acid in the stomach. Calcium citrate is going to be a better option. It also doesn't require food for absorption. Calcium carbonate is not a bad option. Just know that it's going to be better absorbed with food and ideally with an acidic environment in the stomach. Tricalcium phosphate is one that I have found not uncommonly in products nature made. That tends to be one of the salt forms that they have. It, I would say it's kind of similar to calcium carbonate in its absorption approach, but it does provide phosphate in addition to calcium. We know that taking calcium chronically can have constipating effects, especially if it's not absorbed in the bloodstream optimally. So combining it with magnesium is not an unreasonable approach, assuming you do not have any sort of kidney disease. And I don't know if we'll have time today, but if you want to reach out, I have lots of chat. I can chat about magnesium, and some of its great benefits as well in general health. Vitamin D, we know, is a critical fat-soluble vitamin, has many biological functions in addition to supporting bone health. It allows calcium to be not absorbed systemically so much, but allows calcium to be utilized efficiently in bone health. It also has effects on the immune system. I believe has receptors on every immune cell within the immune system, neurologic health as well. Vitamin K2 plus D, guess I might have some questions about that. I said controversial because I'm not sure everyone's jumped on that bandwagon, but there is a reasonable science-backed mechanism for why vitamin K and D might be combined. What I will say, when you're looking for vitamin D and vitamin K products, that you look for vitamin K2, that is not K1 is the one that we think about for blood coagulation. So that is not one you would definitely want to just take a total of vitamin K. So looking at K2 specifically, K2 is just going to allow any calcium that's available to be directed to the bones and less to cardiovascular system. That's a very simplistic way to look at it, but I'm not suggesting I'm a pro or con for D plus K or just D alone. But the mechanisms are not unreasonable. Obviously, if you can get it in your diet, that's going to be the best approach as well. These are the recommended daily intakes of vitamin D3, specifically 600 to 800 a day. I would say most of us, especially women in the United States, tend to have lower vitamin D concentration. So a pretty average dose for most of us is going to be 1,000 to 2,000 units per day. Now, there may be concentration guided approaches where you're going to need even higher concentrations, but I would really stick with these doses unless you're being monitored and guided specifically based on levels. Okay, so someone asked about, that's not the greatest picture, but I think Jennifer asked about Dr. Mary Claire Haver's products. This is just one of them, creatine. I'll talk about that one in a moment. So what's creatine? I actually chatted with, I don't know if she's on, Dr. Zahn yesterday, and I was debating whether I was going to put creatine in here, but I know it's a very popular question. So I thought I would include it, talk a little bit about it, at least what I know about it. So it's a combination of 3 amino acids that is synthesized in the body. So this is not something that is not in the endogenous or within the body. It's also widely available as a supplement. It's been studied for a very, very long time. It's mostly in skeletal muscle, but that should be also in other tissues, brain, heart, etc. There is some data, so I would say the data is mixed, but there is some data to support creatine alone. I say high dose because this is a pretty hefty dose. So high dose creatine alone, or what I personally would suggest, and the data does, is resistance testing in combination with creatine. So 2 to 3, I think most of these studies were 3 times a week, but I know I've seen some with 2 times a week resistance testing, training. So any resistance training that you can do is fantastic, but adding 5 grams a day on average of creatine has shown some benefit, and specifically in improved strength and physical performance measures. I believe there was the paper where I think I must not have put the reference on here. I apologize. I'll do that. Was from some investigators here at UNC that published that. So that's very helpful. There are lots of creatine options out there, and many of them are actually third-party tested. So that's great. I think there's a lot of options. Dr. Mary Claver's actually Haver, they actually do test their product in a lab, and they are currently pursuing NSF certification for their product. So that's pretty impressive. I would not have put the product just because I like her. I would not have put that product up here if I did not feel that it was a reasonable, safe product. Also, this GNC product, there's lots of them, but this is the GNC product is also one that is third-party tested. It does not seem, we don't think that it has any significant drug interactions, at least with menopause hormone therapy. look in the chat real quick. Okay. So I'm gonna wrap up with just some information around some common really ingredients or supplements used for vasomotor symptoms or mood within menopause transition and menopause. I will say some of the data, and I saw a video just the other day that said, what is I think it might have been Dr. Haber. What is menopause? Menopause is a day, right? Is that day. Anything after that day, you're menopause. Anything before that day, menopause transition, right? So it was kind of funny, but in short, we're all on this trajectory at some point in time in our lives, and whether that's, whether we're much younger for different reasons going through menopause, whether there's a period of time where there's menopause transition, or if it's after that one day, that 1 year after the last menstrual period, is now your menopause. These symptoms can be variable, right? So when I say that, this data, I would say, is in this menopause transition, but also in individuals that have fluctuating estrogen, progesterone concentrations, all testosterone concentrations, exposures, but also are having symptoms directly related to that. Phytoestrogens. This could be an entire hour, many hours on its own, but I did want to sort of talk about them as a category. So what are phytoestrogens? So we know they're non-steroidal, naturally occurring polycyclic phenols. That's just what the structure looks like. That they're similar in structure to our endogenous estradiol, or endogenous, what we have inside estrogen. There are multiple different phytoestrogens, more than we could talk about. And some are more, what I would say some are more mimicking estrogen than others. Some are more estrogenic than others are. And even within, like when I was showing you the structures within soy, so even within soy itself, there are many different types of phytoestrogens, sometimes in one plant. So it can get sort of confusing or overwhelming, but their similar approach in general is to mimic what estrogen would do within the body, or to mimic what estrogen as a prescription might do for an individual. It is in a lot of different foods. Fruits are listed here, tend to have higher components of phytoestrogens. The vegetables that are listed here, legumes tends to be a very large category. And I would say where we often tend to focus on extraction of very specific phytoestrogens from these plants in more bottled, per se, dietary supplements. So isoflavones, which I believe is in my next slide, is one type of phytoestrogen that is extracted mainly from soy, but also from other plants as well. Grains, so certain grains can have phytoestrogens. Resveratrol, which we know is higher in red wine than in other grapes. It's also a fairly common dietary supplement, so a capsule or tablet that you might find. Turmeric, as I was just preparing for this, I was checking my emails, and Consumer Lab, one of those resources I told you, had an clinical update on turmeric and menopause. So we believe that there's components of turmeric as well that has phytoestrogens. And turmeric, again, it can be its entire conversation as well. We know turmeric has some other beneficial effects, has been used for thousands of years throughout history as part of diets, but also as a very popular dietary supplement. Other supplements that are somewhat directly listed here, but red clover. So red clover, the stories are that, when red clover grows on land where animals might be grazing, that if they're ingesting a large amount of red clover, they could have various shifts within estrogen. So I believe the original story was sheep that were grazing on a field that was high in red clover. They were noticing had decreased effects, or a decreased ability to to have babies, and couldn't really understand what was going on. And as the story goes, that's how red clover was identified to have phytoestrogen. I did want to briefly mention xenoestrogens. My hunch, as many of you know about this already, and this is a whole category of conversation as well. Xenoestrogens are those estrogenic compounds that we know we are exposed to in our environment. So being within plastics, so BPA is one of those. Lots of cosmetics, topical products, within our water because of some of these products as well. Xenoestrogens are not the same as phytoestrogens, so they tend to have a different effect on estrogen receptors and mimic estrogen in perhaps a less positive way. So we know that we are exposed to chemicals, to the environment, to things we eat all the time. So just, I would say a good resource that just came to me, I didn't put it on here, is Environmental Working Group. I'll add that to this slide before I send them. But the Environmental Working Group does have a good resource to help identify xenoestrogens, as well as lots of other very fascinating things, products that we have that we're exposed to, and things that are in our environment. Okay, so what's the data? So I say, as is kind of typical with dietary supplement data, and maybe that's not clear, I may not have said that. The data, the efficacy data that we have on plant products specifically can be challenging because it can have oftentimes very small numbers of individuals that are within the trials, that can also perhaps not have the most optimal study designs. They may not be placebo controlled, which is ideally, the ideal study design. They may be studied with products that have not been, the product itself has not been well characterized. So we don't know what's in the product itself. So that's why when you often hear data is variable, it's because some studies that were, well designed, we know what the product was, the doses were available and transparent, the dose was optimized, the sample size was adequate to show a difference, it had a placebo arm. Often, will be mixed with other data that was not perhaps as well designed. So that's why I feel like I'm a broken record every time I say the data is variable. But I will say there is very good data in animal models and in vitro that shows a reasonable mechanism of how soy specifically can have estrogenic effects that we know can have decreased hot flashes. There's data with both food intake as well as isoflavone supplements. I will say anything that is going to have an effect on estrogen or estrogenic within the body, I would absolutely ensure that you're having conversations with providers that are also managing menopause hormone therapy. Because they're there to have an action for a reason, right? So if you're combining estrogen and progesterone, or just estrogen, and supplements that have a similar type of effect, it may be hard to predict what that effect is going to be together. So knowing what your goal is, knowing what the product is, having those conversations back to sort of those basics from the beginning, is really critical. Again, the data is mixed with base and better symptoms, but that's likely that is where most of the data is. Definitely mixed with bone mineral density effects, cardiovascular, and cancer risk. So, the data with cancer and soy, right? I know that's a big question, and lots of folks that have had history of breast cancer has concerns about even eating soy. Like there's also data sort of all over the place around soy intake as food, and cancer risk. But I'd say the Shanghai Women's Health Study, which was several thousand women, I'm not even sure the exact number, but a very large study, did find lower risk of premenopausal breast cancer, but no association with postmenopausal breast cancer in their early findings in individuals that ate soy as foods, right? And this was large amounts, like many grams a day. of soy. What I would not suggest, I think I put a question mark. Yes, I did. I had an X against on that soy isoflavones in the bottle, decided to make it a question because I think it really is dependent. Absolutely would encourage food intake of soy, of phytoestrogens, just in general. So you can see these are whole foods. I would not eat, pounds and pounds of soybeans every day or tofu. In fact, it's often suggested that more fermented types of soy, tempeh, natto, if you can find natto, kefir, which is a fermented dairy product, are often going to be better sources, perhaps than tofu. But again, not a negative thing, just to sort of put that out there. But I would be a little more cautious with dietary supplements with soy. Um, Again, not saying don't do that, but especially if you're on menopause hormone therapy, um, I I would have a very I would ensure absolutely that your prescriber is aware of your desire, and is your desire to decrease vasomotor symptoms going to be fulfilled with, if you decide to take menopause hormone therapy, it may not be needed to have both types of products. Okay. On this here. Okay. I'm going to go through these very quickly because I know we're after 116. Okay. Black cohosh, very popular product. Um, there's mixed data on vasomotor symptoms. There's some to show that it has been helpful, some to show that it's not. We used to think, I believe, that black cohosh was a phytoestrogen. We're thinking that the mechanism is a little bit different, perhaps more like a different class of medications that we have. In the early 2000s, there were a case series of liver toxicity. I will say, if you look at those cases very carefully, the FDA was not able to determine a direct correlation with black cohosh specifically. It doesn't mean that it wasn't. Was it black cohosh or was it the product? So those are questions that I would say, unfortunately, we really cannot answer. Remifemin was traditionally the product, the black cohosh product that was extensively studied. There are a lot of other black cohosh products on the market. Gaia Herbs has one. It's really important that the root is what is being used. There are stories and case reports throughout the literature of dietary supplements made from plants where the wrong active components are being used, and those can be quite dangerous and may not be helpful as well. Maca, my favorite one. I think we just have a few more here. Maca, I can't lie, it's my favorite product in this whole list. I'm not suggesting it has the most data, but I think it has a reasonable mechanism. There are small number of clinical trials that show decreases in menopausal symptoms. That's a very broad statement, but a variety of different symptoms. The gelatinized product is what you're going to be looking for. It doesn't mean it was made from gelatin. I can describe what that's like, if you'd like. There are many maca products, but I would advise, if you have an interest in taking maca, that you just use maca alone. I think that product, two pictures I showed you before, one had just maca, one had a lot of other things in it. So it's going to be very difficult if you do have a side effect. And when I say maca, I love it. Again, still with that caveat, if you're on hormone therapy, may not be the best option for individuals that are also, in fact, I personally would not combine those two. Pollen extract. Until I read the North American Menopause Society guidance, I had not heard of pollen extract for menopause symptoms. I'm going to be transparent. However, I hear it's kind of popular and there's questions, so I wanted to make sure I included it. I will say the original products, Femilin, that was developed, I believe, in Germany, is a proprietary blend, so I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just a little bit more challenging to know exactly what's in it. I did list some other products here that you'll see on the slide that have been third-party tested, that I do feel represent what's in the bottle. I'm sure there's others, but I did have some challenge finding these products that I felt were reputable products. I don't know that we as a science know the exact mechanism of how it can be supportive in reducing vasomotor symptoms and lots of other things, but just thought I wanted to make sure you all knew about it. And then the last slide, the last product, DHEA. So not a plant, not a vitamin, not a mineral. It's one of those non-vitamin, non-mineral products. It's actually a hormone, a prohormone. You can see the picture here for those of you that are interested in what happens within the body and when you give DHEA. So we know that DHEA declines over time as you get older. We also know that it is, again, the prohormone produced primarily in the adrenal gland that then metabolizes to various estrogens as well as testosterone. So the reason I put a cautionary tale is I would be, this is easily found on many shelves in many locations. Not to say other products are not benign, but I think it's really, really critical that if you feel like you want to take the HEA, it is a well-educated it's a well-educated decision, and you're having those conversations with your provider, because it can have significant downstream effects. Now, we're very fortunate in that it can have downstream effects for lots of reasons that it can be helpful. In fact, there's a FDA-approved pharmaceutical prescription medication that is a vaginal suppository that can be used in some situations for vaginal atrophy and vaginal dryness. And for individuals that have adrenal insufficiency, it's critical, it's life-saving for those individuals. But yeah, I cannot emphasize enough to ensure that you're taking a reputable product. There's a conversation with your provider, and there's a reason why you might be taking it. I think that is passing on to you all.
Thank you so much. This was super informative. I learned a lot today. I need to go check the labels of my multivitamin. This slide just describes our research study that's going on right now. It does involve hormone replacement therapy. It is a randomized controlled trial, which means that some people get active hormones and some people get placebo. But the point of this is we're trying to determine what effects estrogen has on the brain in women transitioning to menopause, and how estrogen acts as a rapid antidepressant in some people. So that's the point of this study. We're looking for people to participate. So if you're at all curious or interested, please, you can see our website there or give us a call. We are in the process of putting in lots of other grants to do more research. And so if you are interested in what Dr. Corbett was talking about today with supplements, it seems wild to me that we keep saying like there's just no research, right? But we're in the position to do the research on these topics. And so one of the grants we're writing right now, it's top of mind because it's due on Monday, but we're trying to engage people with lived experience, like yourselves in studies, to help us understand what questions we should be asking. And I think you all had a lot of great questions here today, but we are in the process of recruiting people to help steer our research going forward. Should we be studying supplements? Do you want more research on maca or black cohosh? Should we compare it to how effective hormone therapies are for some of the symptoms that you all are having? To Monique's point, should we be looking at magnesium during this time? There's a lot of insomnia, but also, is it good for migraines? I don't know if we have the answers to all these questions yet. Yes, there's a couple questions for you, Dr. Corbett, in the chat. Monique's question. Oh, thanks, Cecilia. We also have resources here at UNC. We do have a number of providers. It's growing every day because we are working with them to have more and more people be comfortable prescribing hormone replacement therapy and educating others. These are some of our clinical partners here at UNC. I know there can at times be wait lists. This is our midlife women's mood disorder clinic. Um, we have a number of providers. We have many current openings. There is no wait list for this clinic right now. We can do non-hormonal medications, hormonal medications in some cases. We do behavioral interventions and coaching for folks that either are interested or not interested in medications, want to use supplements. So we have a full complement of things that we can offer to address lots of menopause symptoms, insomnia, depression, anxiety, irritability is sort of a big one for us, but also brain fog, and we have lots of ideas to help support people. It doesn't mean that you're going to be in therapy forever. If you give us a call, we can do brief consultations and give you some recommendations. So that's the information there. But I want to, in the few minutes we have left, Dr. Corbett, do you want to talk about magnesium for migraines? Do you know if there's support for that?
Yeah, so there is some data with magnesium to help prevent, uh, to decrease numbers of migraines, I guess, per se. So yes, there is some data. I would, and I'm going to talk about another indication and then product selection because I think these kind of go hand in hand. So magnesium also there, I talk about it all the time as for to help with sleep. Now it doesn't help everyone. There again, that's one of those very small studies, very small amount of studies, but migraine prevention, um, as well as sleep, I think would be fantastic, as well as if you're taking calcium, may counteract some constipation with calcium. Now, the challenges with magnesium are looking at magnesium products that are more absorbed and less focusing on in the gut. Now, if you need things that stay in the gut to help stimulate bowel movements, for example, by all means, that's what I would look at those products. So magnesium oxide and citrate. But if you're thinking about pushing magnesium systemically to having effects where we want them for migraines or to help with sleep, it's a little more challenging. You got to kind of give it a little boost. In that case, I would look at chelated forms of magnesium. So um, bisglycinate, glycinate. Um, oh shoot, there's a few others. I just had them on the top of my head. I talk about this all the time. I forgot malate. There's other salt forms, so I would try to avoid magnesium oxide, magnesium citrate, and magnesium chloride, which is mostly topical anyway. But looking at those other more absorbable forms. But yeah, great question.
Another question is, are there any studies approving hormone therapy for patients that have had a stroke? I am not aware of any. This was maybe more of a question for Dr. Zahn, who's not here today, but I think stroke is usually one of the rule outs for hormone replacement therapy. But I would work closely with your doctor and finding the right doctor is hard, I will acknowledge. But finding a doctor who's willing to work with you around how to manage menopause symptoms in the context of stroke. And you're always welcome to reach out to our OBGYN team at UNC, who are very thoughtful around, in terms of managing these things. Dr. Zahn, you can see her here on this page as an gynecologist and is one of two folks who oversee the menopause clinics at UNC. Rachel Arudia is the other. And I would recommend one of those two in particular for managing that symptom.
Yeah, thank you for answering because I don't know of any either. And they're from the integrative health hat world, there are so many options that again are going to have variable data, but some of which are not, and I'm not even speaking of supplements here, but there are definitely some other options.
Okay, and then final question, then I have to run. Have you heard of Banyan Botanicals products?
Yes, they're awesome. I love them. Yes.
Perfect. A great way to end. Thank you so much, Dr. Corbett. Like I said, I learned a lot today. I think our audience did as well. So thanks so much.